Good morning. I'm George Hauptfuhrer, and I'm proud to be able to be here to introduce Betty Scott Noble. I'm using her middle name because she is in the line of Agnes Scott. Her mother and grandmother and a bunch of aunts and others, in addition to Betty herself, graduated from Agnes Scott, and I know we have some alumni here today. Betty also was an adjunct professor at Agnes Scott for 21 years. But she lived in Anniston, Alabama with her parents from 1956 to 1971. So that was the peak of the violence in the civil rights movement that we're going to talk about today as a follow-on to the discussion we had of the At the River documentary a week and a half ago on a Thursday night, as well as what Carolyn Crowder herself spoke about here last Sunday. And of course, she did that film. And in a few minutes, we will see her interview of Dr. Noble. But before we go to that, I wanted to just give a little background about Dr. Noble. He was born in rural Mississippi in 1921. Lived to be 100 years old, died just 3 years ago, and went to King's College in Tennessee. He also got his MDiv at Columbia Seminary, where he later served for 26 years on the board, including being chairman of the board for 5 years. He served 4 churches during a 37-year period, the longest of which was First Presbyterian in Anniston. And that was during the time that we will be talking about here shortly. And Betty has something that she will read shortly after we go through a number of slides to provide some background of how we got to where we were in the late 50s and the 60s. So if I can work this clicker okay, we will go here. 1865 was really an important point in U.S. history for a number of reasons. At the top, it says that it was the end of the Civil War and the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. But also in 1865 was the start of the Jim Crow local and state laws in the South that continued discrimination against blacks. Also in 1865 was the start of the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, in Tennessee and other southern states to enforce those Jim Crow codes. And in 1865, unfortunately, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and Andrew Johnson became president. He was from Tennessee, which of course was a slave state. He was not embracing Reconstruction. And as a matter of fact, the following year, when Congress passed the first of several civil rights acts, as shown on the screen, he vetoed it. Fortunately, Congress overrode that veto, which supported the 13th Amendment. 2 years later was the 14th Amendment, which provided all citizens equal protection under the laws. And then 2 years after that was the 15th Amendment, which prohibited states from disenfranchising voters on the basis of race. Despite all of these amendments and the Civil Rights Act, blacks throughout the South were not able to register to vote. They continued to be disenfranchised. And then in 1875, the second Civil Rights Act was passed, and that was the last federal Civil Rights Act enacted until 1957, 82 years later. And so the discrimination continued in the South despite these acts. And it was actually, unfortunately, reinforced in 1896 by the Supreme Court decision in Plessy versus Ferguson, which ruled that separate but equal was okay. And so in the South, the Jim Crow codes continued. That was thankfully overturned in 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education decision, and that banned separate but equal. And you might think that that would have really improved things quickly, but it didn't. And in 1955, a young man, black man named Emmett Till was killed. There's a movie about his life and what his mother did after he was killed, which I would strongly recommend. I've seen it. And I'd recommend another movie, which actually my wife and I saw last night for the second time, called Mississippi Burning, with Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe. And that's, again, based on a true story in Philadelphia, Mississippi. In 1955, and continuing for a whole year to the end of 1956, was the Montgomery bus boycott, which was the first really large demonstration against segregation. You may remember the name Rosa Parks. She tried to take a seat in a bus that was not in the colored area, and then the blacks in Mississippi, in Montgomery, walked to work, whatever distance that was, for the next 12 months to draw attention to the segregation there. In 1957, there was another Civil Rights Act, which established the commission that you see there. And then 3 years later was another Civil Rights Act that provided for federal inspection of local voter registration to better reinforce the 57 Act. So if you're counting, that's 4 separate Civil Rights Acts that were intended to fix the situation, and they just weren't working. And so even though the Supreme Court made another decision in 1960, it didn't really help. I thought it might be helpful to show this map of the cities we're about to talk about. Anniston is up there to the right, just off of I-20 between Birmingham and Atlanta. You know where Birmingham is, and then Montgomery is south down here. There was a march you may know of between Selma and Montgomery several years later that included Martin Luther King and others from Atlanta, Hosea Williams, and that's a 54-mile walk. And unfortunately, when they started in Selma, they were crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, you may have heard of, and they were attacked by KKK and others, and the law enforcement didn't do anything to prevent the violence against the marchers. And the marchers included a lot of white people in addition to the blacks in the area. So just a very sad time in the history of the United States. It was triggered by the killing of a black man in Marion, Alabama, Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was unarmed in a peaceful protest, and he was shot and killed. So just an unbelievable time in US history, and very understandable that there were the protests that came out of that. On this page, let me start with 1961, because this was the beginning of the, well, up above there, the core group organized these Freedom Riders to ride into the South to make sure that what had been passed legislatively was enforced, and unfortunately, it wasn't. And again, the Freedom Riders included whites as well as blacks. When they arrived in Anniston in 1961 at a Greyhound bus terminal, they were attacked. The police didn't come to help out for 20 minutes. So again, they were part of the problem. The bus did leave the terminal, but because the tires were slashed, it didn't get very far, and the KKK followed that bus. And then you can see over here on one of the easels, that is the burning bus in the suburbs of Anniston in 1961. And the book that Dr. Noble wrote is called Beyond the Burning Bus. And that's the one that Nick mentioned is available if anybody would like to buy a copy. There was a second bus, a Trailways bus, that was also attacked in Anniston. And then some KKK got on that bus and rode it to Birmingham, where there was more violence. I mean, this stuff is just unbelievable, but we need to know that it did happen. Now, Dr. Noble had grown up in Mississippi and had some friends that were the children of sharecroppers there. And he was sympathetic to their situation, and he met two black ministers in Anniston, Bob McLean and Nimrod Reynolds, and they talked about how to calm the tensions in Anniston, because obviously it was not good for the city at all. They acknowledged the need to build those bridges, and their discussions led to the formation of the biracial council in Anniston, which was a really significant event. Dr. Noble, as mentioned at the top here, received many derogatory phone calls, especially about midnight on a Saturday night. And the FBI reported bomb threats. Dr. Noble learned he was #1 on the local KKK's hit list. So we titled this story, Profile in Courage. And as Carolyn Crowder mentioned last week, all of these Presbyterian ministers were incredibly brave during this period. President Kennedy called the mayor of Anniston to applaud the efforts of the biracial council, but then was assassinated a month later. I think I'll skip to the next slide. At the top, 1964, Dr. Noble reached out to the local KKK leader, Kenneth Adams. They had a cordial meeting, and then the number of phone calls to his house on Saturday night declined. And so, again, it speaks to the willingness of Dr. Noble to reach out and try to communicate and build a bridge with whoever. There was another Civil Rights Act in 1964 outlawing discrimination and establishing the Commission of Equal Employment Opportunity. Although it should have happened a long time earlier, the first conviction of a white man for killing a black person was in 1965. I mentioned the march, actually 3 separate marches from Selma to Montgomery. And then we had a Voting Rights Act that came right after that march. So the march was successful in achieving better enforcement of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which were 90 some years earlier. So, the problems lasted a long time. And then there was another Civil Rights Act that passed in '68. So Congress was trying to help the situation, but because law enforcement in the South was not doing their job the way they should have, blacks continued to feel that discrimination. Now, I have 4 quotes on the screen from Dr. Noble's book. I think the 2 that I would highlight would be the 2nd and the 4th bullet point. I realized deep in my heart and soul that Southern life as it then existed simply was not right. It could not be justified on the grounds of morality, fairness, or justice, much less on the grounds of Christian faith. And then bullet point number 4. I think that people today, black and white, need to know the meaning of the struggle of the 1960s with its dangers and sacrifices, and to appreciate the results. And I'll turn it now to Betty to read another quote that's from the book.
Good morning. Can y'all hear me? I appreciate y'all being here. I don't think that's working. It's not working. Now can you hear me? Okay. All right. I wanted to read this that was written in the book. It was a resolution that the city council passed right before Daddy left Anniston. During that time, there was no public recognition at all for anything that he did. The situation was such that that just could not be. And you'll hear about the city council when Daddy talks about his profile. And the first black man to be elected for the city council was a dentist. And he engineered this resolution as a thank you to Daddy before he left Anniston in '71. He was pretty worn out after '71, after the civil rights movement. My little brother had died 3 years before that, and they went to Cambridge for a year. And before they went, the city council read this resolution that I'm going to read for you. All too seldom there comes to a community a man who in truth is a man for all seasons, a man who serves the community in troubled times and in times secure, a man who was so often the bridge over troubled waters, a man who had the great faculty for bringing out the best in all of us, a man whose dedication to God and his fellow man knew no limits, even when faced with great personal tragedy. Such a man is the Reverend J. Phillips Noble. On behalf of a grateful city, we, the Anniston City Council, extend to him our sincere thanks, and we wish him Godspeed in all of his endeavors. That meant the world to Daddy, and he had it on the wall in his study. And it especially meant a lot to him because the first black man that was appointed to the council, engineered this and introduced it, and I think wrote it too. So thank you.
With Milo's help, we'll go to the video. And you'll see at the end of the video, Betty pushing her father toward the memorial plaque in Anniston when he was in a wheelchair.
The prisoner said, I sat in meeting after meeting where we talked about how we could kill Phil Noble and Miller Sproul.
In the 1950s and 60s in the Deep South, some Presbyterian ministers took stands in support of the civil rights movement. They faced ostracism in their communities, threats from the local KKK and White Citizens Council, and loss of their jobs. This series profiles these ministers who were young, brave, humble, and bold in their convictions. Instead of standing on the banks in the darkness of segregation, they waded into the currents of the river, headed toward the light of justice.
At the river, Lord, I stand. Guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand.
How did a guy raised in rural Mississippi develop these ideas about racial justice?
Grace of God.
So when
Well-
did that happen?
I was raised on a farm, and we had a few sharecroppers always there. And my brother, just older than me, William, and I, we played with those black children. And we had one particular friend who was about our age, and we played with them and all like that. And even at that time, I had a little sensitivity that our friend, Lysander, would never be able to have the opportunities that we had and that sort of thing. And that was just sort of a little indication that some philosophers said God has put a sense of right and wrong in everybody's heart. And I think that's probably true. I went to college in East Tennessee, King College. I began to see something about this segregation culture in a way that I hadn't before, because before we just breathed it like everything else, We didn't think anything much of it.
I want to talk to you about where you were during the 50s and 60s, during the Civil Rights era in the South.
I was in Anniston, Alabama. I was there a while before I decided I'd go down and register to vote. And this white woman was in charge of all of this, you know. She gave me the papers and everything like that. And one of the black people that went up to ask some question, and she said, "You can't ask any question. You know, you have to fill out the form." So I realized then that black folks were going to have a hard time voting in this area. When I filled out my form, it said, "Will you support the laws of the United States and Alabama?" And I said, "Yes, but the laws of the America and then the state of Alabama." And she said, "Why did you do that?" That states' rights was the thing. I said, "Because that's the way I feel." No. She said, "Would you be willing to change that?" And I thought for a minute. I said, "No, I believe I'll let it." She said, "I don't know whether you'll get to vote or not." I said, "Well, that's all right." She said, "They'll decide about it, and you'll get notification about it." Well, before I got the notification about it, one of the elders said to me, the representative from that area, Calhoun County, had said to him, he said, "Y'all got a new preacher. What is he? Is he a communist or what?"
Word gets around, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Tell me about when the Freedom Riders came through.
The bus burning was done on Mother's Day in 1961. You know, very violent. The Greyhound bus pulled into the station, and when it did, they were met by a mob of hoodlums and Klan members, and they tried to get on the bus, did get on the bus, and beat up some of them. And when the bus was able to get out, they went to the highway going toward Birmingham, and about 5 or 6 miles out of town, the tires went down because they had sliced them. Then the mob followed them, and they threw a firebomb in the bus. And of course, those in there tried to get out, and they held the door from the outside where they couldn't get out. The mob met them again and beat them with sticks and chains and so forth, and they lay on the ground out there around the bus.
Tell me about that little girl across the road.
That's a thrilling story. Her family had a little grocery store on the side of the road, and she was about 12 years old, and she didn't really know what was happening, but she knew there were people there that were hurting and gasping, and so she went out, got some water, and went over to them and tried to give it to them. But as a result of that, their family were threatened by the Ku Klux Klan because she did that. I just observed the community's reaction to it. They were glad it happened, but sorry it happened in Anniston. Quintus Reynolds, the Baptist, said he went to the leading Baptist white ministers in the city, and they would not talk to him, not even on the telephone. Bob McLean went to all the Methodist ministers in the white churches. Then they said, "Well, let's try the Presbyterians. We've tried everybody else." So they called and said, could they come and see me? And I said, yes. So we set a time, and they came out to my study. They tried to tell me what the situation was, how bad it was. Well, I had grown up in Mississippi on a farm, and I knew all about sharecropping and the rigid discrimination and all that, and the effect of it, too, to some extent. So I listened to them, but I knew what they were talking about already. They wondered what we could do about it. Well, Bob McLean says, I said, let us pray. Bob tells the story that all three of us sort of teared up a little bit. I don't remember that part of it, but that's what he said. And he said he'd never in his life seen a white man that would cry about the Negro problem, you know. We decided what we would do is gather a few other ministers and meet and see what progress we could make. The black ministers had a ministerial association. We, the white members, had one. We'd never met with them, had no relation to them whatsoever. But we began to gather some white ministers who would be willing to come, some black ministers who would come, and we met time and time again. One of the times when we met, we'd meet in the different churches. They met in the Lutheran church, and when we came out, Wallace's lieutenants were videoing the ones who were coming out.
George Wallace's troopers or something?
Yeah.
As you came out?
That's right. To identify the people in Anniston that were not following George Wallace around. I had said so much that I knew I couldn't say no about it. Claude Gill, the mayor, said, let me give you some advice. Don't announce the meetings that you're going to have. And he said, don't meet in the same place all of the time. Well, that told you how severe the situation was. The two black ministers that came to me, who were on the council also, they were the ones that volunteered to do that. And we wanted to be so secret because we thought if they knew we were going to do that, there'd be a problem.
Right, right.
And we all said we'd all be secret about it. And they didn't even tell their wives they were going that afternoon. They were honorable people that did what they said they were going to do. Yeah. When they went to the library that afternoon, parked the cars, and started walking up to the sidewalk in front of the library, 50 or 60 people just emerged from around a mob with chains and bats and all that sort of thing.
So it got out.
It got out, and we suspected that it got out through the police department. We met at Miller Sproul's house to say, what are we going to do about this? And we all agreed that we were not going to let this go by without some real action, because it would mean that the hoodlums were running the city and we could never do anything anymore. So we were all definite that that's what we wanted to do. Charles Doster, one of the lawyers that was on the committee, he said, let's call the president. He's the one who made all this possible anyway. So they put in a call to the president.
Of the United States.
President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. And he wasn't there. They would have him to call back. Later, the president, in his address to the nation, he held up Anniston as a model of trying to work through this sort of thing. The mayor had contact from a number of cities in the South asking how'd they do it and what was happening. And the background of that was that no city in the South would appoint a joint committee because they said if we do, it will mean integration. The governor of Mississippi and the governor of Alabama, a number said we will never do that. But Claude Deal finally was brave enough and strong enough to join the rest of them, the mayor, to do that.
You guys were so brave. Do you think that committee did some good?
Lord have mercy. They did a whale of a lot of good.
Were you ever frightened?
Scared to death.
I guess so. The Klan was really active in Anniston.
Well, they would call on the telephone at night, particularly on Saturday night before Sunday. They'd call and talk about us and that sort of thing, you know. If I'd known at the time that I was the #1 person on the Ku Klux Klan hit list, I'd have been more scared than I was, you know. Kenneth Adams was the head of the Klan in Anniston. The mayor knew him because he raised up on the same side of town, you know. And so the mayor said to me one time, he said, I wish you and Kenneth Adams could talk together. We set a time, and one late afternoon, about 5 o'clock, when all the folks, staff at the office had gone, we met out at our church. And he came in, we shook hands, sat down, started talking. There was no indication of any kind of violence or anger on either my part or his part. We just talked about it. Oh, well, he said he didn't wonder the black people had souls and all that sort of thing, you know, just so extreme. And after I met with Kenneth Adams, those calls dropped off considerably. During that time, I was keenly aware that they might do something, the Klan might do something, because of everything that was going on, and I knew a lot that was going on here in Anniston. And the car was parked in the driveway at the house. And nearly every morning, as I would take the children to school, I would go out first and look around at the car and then raise my hood to see if I saw any bomb, any such thing like that. When Martin Luther King was shot, one of the elders came up to me and he said he got exactly what he deserved. And I just looked at him and he slinked off. You know, that attitude was so deep in so many people's hearts. A few years ago, a television station up east arranged a rerun of the Freedom Riders.
Savior, oh Savior, do not pass me by while on others thou art calling. Do not pass me by.
When they came through Anniston, they had a welcoming dinner. Then when we got through, went up to the library, and there were about, I reckon, 50 or 60 people who came from the city, and they were about half black and half white, and people began to share their experience during that time, during that period of time, and it was just amazing to hear what blacks and whites would tell, and it was a very healthy sort of thing that was going on.
And as we got out of the bus, all of us were suffering from smoke inhalation. We were falling on the ground just trying to get some fresh air and just trying to get some water. And I could imagine God Almighty sitting on his throne, looked at his right hand to his Archangel Gabriel, said, my children are hurting. Somebody need to help them. And I'm telling you, it must have been a 12-year-old little girl. So here am I, Lord, send me. And she ran in and out of her house, bringing water to us. I renamed her the Angel of Anniston. Look at her now. Stand up, Janie. Stand up. Let everybody see you. when the rest of the Christians wouldn't do anything to help us. Jenny could only think of what she learned in Sunday school. In and out of her house she ran, bringing us water, giving us relief. I will never forget that sight.
When we were about through, a man stood up and said, "Well, my name is so-and-so, and I probably ought not to be here." Because he said, "My father was in the Ku Klux Klan and attacked the bus to try to kill y'all." And he said, I wish I could clear my family's name, and I ask your forgiveness about it." All this entirely unexpected. He was about as far as from over there to me where Hank Thomas was. And there were 4 or 5 of the actual Freedom Riders who were there at that time. And when he said he asked y'all to forgive him, Hank Thomas walked over to him like that, and the man stuck out his hand, and Hank just gathered him in his arms, just gathered him in embraces, and said, "I forgive you."
1961, I was in the springtime of my life. My music was still in me, and my song was yet to be sung. And yes, Reverend Dr. Noble, we're old now, but I want all of you, especially young people, to know we fought the good fight. We kept the faith.
Oh, precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I
And perhaps discuss any of the 3 topics that are on the screen here. So, Betty, if you would come up, please, and anyone who has questions or comments for Betty, please speak up.
Thank you. Woo. Thanks for being here, Betty. Thank you, Mr. Hauptfuhrer. My question is, what do you think your dad would say today about the human rights and civil rights issues happening today?
Honestly don't know. He felt like... Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now? Yes. Felt like, at that time that they had made a lot of progress. He was very proud and extremely humble about the progress that they had made. And they integrated the whole town almost silently. There was absolutely no incident beside that one at the library. But I think he would probably be upset seeing the situation as it is today. Oh, hi, Pat. Sorry. My video man. I think he would not be very happy about the situation today. That's all I know to say, really. What would he want you to do? Well, he would, again, he was so humble, but, it would make him very happy if others took up the mantle that he did. He was very big on the church being involved in the racial situation and would be very pleased that we're doing this today. Although he's so humble, I can hear him right now saying, "Betty, don't you have anything better to do with your time?" But, he would be very proud that that this is being shown in some of the churches, and people were, he wanted people to learn about civil rights, and there's so many kids today, they don't know anything. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but they don't, and actually, we have, if there are any young people here, and there are a few, people just don't know about all these things. Even highly educated people like you all are, so many of them. That's why I appreciate George and all he did to work so hard on this program and everything he does to carry on Daddy's legacy, and he does a lot. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's about as good as I can do.
Can you talk about your dad's relationship with Allison Williams?
I don't know anything about that. I'm sorry, but I don't. Looks like Peggy does, though.
No, I don't. I wanted to know the story from your perspective. You were still at home, not
Yeah.
in college yet, at night and the phone calls. How did your parents deal with you, and what did they, did they protect you? Did they involve you? Were you teased at school? What?
Well, my answer will probably surprise you in some ways. We had a very normal, as my brother says, we knew Daddy was doing something, and we knew it was really big. But, we weren't involved in discussions at dinner time, and we were protected in a lot of ways. The only incident that I encountered, well, actually two of them, but one, there was a man named Charlie Keyes, and he was from the North, and he had come down, and he was a Klan sympathizer. And he used to put out this report, I don't know how often, it seemed like every day, but probably every week or something. It was called the Keyes Report. And he would stand, my high school was, on a block, and there was some, Beverly Dew was there, she knows how that is. Beverly, Allen, yeah. And there was a strip of land right here where Charlie Keyes would stand. And it was right on a corner. And my mother would take me to school, and I don't know why didn't have sense enough her to let me out at another place, but she would let me out right across the street. And as I would walk across the street, he would get that report and shake it in my face and say, "Here comes that nigger lover's daughter right now." And he did that morning after morning after morning after morning. And Daddy jokingly wrote in his book that he was worried about how this would affect his children, but he didn't need to worry, because one day I just got my fill, and I just went up in his face, and I just said, "Why don't you just go on down the road?" So that was really the only incident like that. Stupid things like my high school teacher wouldn't let me have opinions in class, because she didn't want to hear about this. Me and another boy, his father was the president minister for Birmingham too, she'd say, "Noble Burgess, no opinions today." But one time I did observe this, and it was pretty terrifying. This high school was integrated between my junior and senior year, I think it was, and we all went to summer school to avoid that teacher that said, "No opinions today." She was a history teacher. And so all of us went to, you probably know who I'm talking about, Beverly, but I won't mention the name. So one day, I was walking up, there was some steps going up to the school, and I wasn't paying a lot of attention, and I walked up, and I saw these two black boys ahead of me, and there were benches on each side of the sidewalk, and they walked up there and put their books down, and then in no time flat, out of the bushes came all these Klan people, jumping on them and doing all this stuff. Well, my first impulse was, I'm going to jump on them. And then I thought, well, that's stupid, they'll kill you. So I went into the school and got the principal, but we were really protected in a lot of ways. We didn't know the details about what Daddy was doing. And he was so modest about it, it took us begging him for 40 years to write that book. because he felt like he didn't have a right to write it because he didn't get beat up or anything like that like so many other people did. So anyway, I hope that answers your question enough, Peggy.
Just the tip of the iceberg, but it's okay.
Other questions?
Or Beverly, do you want to share anything since you were a member of First Presbyterian Anniston?
My fondest memories are just my adoration of Phil Noble. He was a champion, and I admired him so fiercely. My dad was a forever elder, forever deacon, and he loved that church. Our whole family did. But I was just like Betty. I was young. I was older than Betty, but not much. And it was sort of like living in a cocoon in a way. You just thought, this can't really be real. But it's fascinating from this look back. It really, I mean, it's real, but I don't remember it as that real at the time.
Other questions, comments?
Nick, do we have time to break into the little tables for one of the questions?
We don't.
We don't?
No. I would say if the questions have been up on the screen, so if you've had a chance to think about it, maybe take some time to reflect. But unfortunately, we have used up all our time, and want to say thank you to Betty and George for sharing their time and thoughts and message with us today. I think we're excited to hear from Reverend Farmer next week on his personal experience. So bless everyone to go out in the world and find the strength to do what's right.
I want to make one last comment. I know I said it a minute ago, but I just want to thank George and give him my appreciation for all he did to put together this program. He did it all. And more than that, I want to thank him for all he does to carry on Daddy's legacy. It means the world to me. Thank you, George.
And a final reminder about the books, if you're interested in purchasing them, they're available in the back.